5 men set off on a snowy February night, just going home from a basketball game, but they never made it back. Days turned into weeks, and soon their families would learn of a terrible discovery. 4 bodies, each found miles from the other, and 1 man who was never seen again. Who were the Yuba County Five, and what happened to them that night? Before we unravel the mystery of their disappearance, let's meet the Yuba County Five. They were just a group of friends, known for being friendly and kind-hearted. 4 of them, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Ted Wire, and Jackie Hewitt, had some form of intellectual disability. The 5th, Gary Mathias, was a Vietnam War veteran managing paranoid schizophrenia. They shared a love of sports, attending games together, and even forming their own basketball team. On February 24, 1978, the group went to a basketball game at California State University in Chico. After a quick snack stop at a local market, they began the drive back to their homes, but somewhere along the way, their route took a deadly detour. The disappearance. From Chico to their hometowns, it should have been a 78-kilometer drive, but they didn't go home. Police later discovered that they'd turned off onto a mountain road in Plumas National Forest, far from any route back. Their car was eventually found abandoned in a snowbank, miles up the forested mountain, well beyond the snowline. The car, undamaged and not out of fuel, held no signs of a struggle. Even stranger, a witness claimed to have seen headlights and figures outside the car that night. This witness, who had a heart attack and was left half-conscious in his own car, later said he wasn't sure what he saw was real. But this witness's account remains the last possible sighting of the group alive. The search for the Yuba County Five was massive, yet the deep snow made progress slow. As time passed, hope began to fade. When the snow thawed in June, a motorcyclist passing through a remote campground stumbled upon a grim discovery: a cabin with a broken window, where Ted Wire's body lay under blankets. He was frostbitten, unshaven, suggesting he'd survived weeks in the cold. Inside the cabin were unopened cans of food and an unused propane tank. Despite having supplies to survive, Ted never used the resources available. His fate was heartbreaking but puzzling. Why didn't he turn on the heat or open the other food lockers? These questions remain unanswered to this day. More bodies and a missing person. 2 days after finding Ted, the remains of Bill Sterling and Jack Madruga were discovered nearly 18 kilometers from the cabin, suggesting they may have tried to walk back to safety. Both bodies were scattered near a forest road, eerily close to the location where the witness had seen flashlight beams. Jackie Hewitt's remains were found not far from the others. But Gary Mathias, the 5th member, was never found. For over 40 years, his disappearance has fueled theories of foul play, with no evidence as to what happened to him. Many believe that somehow, Gary might have been the key to this mystery, and his whereabouts remain unknown. The case of the Yuba County Five continues to haunt investigators and the families left behind. Why did they abandon their car and head up the mountain? Why didn't Ted, who survived the longest, use the resources at hand? Families of the men have always maintained that something darker was at play, pointing to the group's disabilities and suggesting they might have been tricked, threatened, or driven off course by someone else. Over the years, multiple theories have emerged, and we're going to explain 7 theories which have to most supporters about this case. 1. Accidental tragedy, lost and overcome by nature. One theory suggests the 5 men accidentally veered off course and succumbed to the freezing conditions. After their car became stuck, they may have tried to find shelter and help, eventually reaching the remote cabin where Ted Wire's body was found. The Plumas National Forest has challenging terrain, particularly in winter. Hypothermia could explain why they didn't turn on the propane heater or access the remaining food. Also, the cabin's supplies were untouched, which could indicate a state of confusion or poor judgment, common in extreme hypothermia. Counterpoints. This theory struggles with the fact that most of the men weren't strangers to nature. Despite their disabilities, they would likely have recognized the danger and tried to return to the main road rather than journeying deeper into unfamiliar territory. The cabin's organized state, without typical signs of multiple people staying long-term, also contradicts the idea of a prolonged survival attempt. 2. Foul play, encountering danger along the way. Some believe the group met foul play, possibly encountering a dangerous person on the road. The fact that the group deviated from their planned route and ended up far from familiar areas suggests they might have been chased or lured by someone. The theory gains traction with witness Joseph Schoen's claims that he saw lights and figures near the car that night, though his story evolved over time. Some argue Schoen's might have been involved intentionally or otherwise, especially if he interacted with them and caused them to flee. The missing person case file later reclassified Gary Mathias as a possible homicide victim, supporting the notion of foul play. Counterpoints. Critics point out that Shones was reportedly in poor health, experiencing chest pains that night, making it less likely he orchestrated a confrontation. Additionally, if someone had a reason to harm them, why leave the scene so confusingly? Many believe foul play would have left more direct evidence or signs of a struggle near the car. 3. Paranoia-induced flight. Gary Mathias's schizophrenia episode. Some speculate that Gary Mathias, who was known to have paranoid schizophrenia, may have had an episode that led the group off course. They may have attempted to escape from perceived dangers, resulting in a tragic journey into the woods. Gary had experienced previous episodes of paranoia and disorientation, so if he became convinced they were in danger, he might have influenced the others to follow him up the mountain. The remote forest darkness and the possibility of Gary's hallucinations could explain why they moved deeper into the wilderness. Counterpoints. This theory is highly controversial because individuals with schizophrenia generally cannot easily convince others to follow their delusions. Gary had never exhibited violent or controlling tendencies, so it's unlikely he could manipulate the group, especially as Jack Madruga, who was driving, would typically stick to his planned routes. The theory oversimplifies mental health issues and may unfairly attribute the tragedy to Gary's condition without sufficient proof. 4. Confrontation with Joseph Shones, an altercation turned deadly. The theory posits that the 5 men encountered Shones on the mountain road, leading to a confrontation. Shones was reportedly tailgated that night, which could indicate that either he or the group was trying to communicate or confront one another, resulting in the group fleeing out of confusion or fear. Shones reported seeing the men in lights that night, suggesting he had an opportunity to interact with them. If there had been a misunderstanding, or if Shones felt threatened, he may have confronted them, causing the group to scatter. Shones had a history of erratic behavior and drinking, raising suspicions about his reliability. Counterpoints. If Shones was in poor health due to a potential heart attack, it's unlikely he was physically capable of a confrontation that would drive 5 people into the wilderness. Shones himself later expressed doubt about what he'd seen, calling into question the accuracy of his memories. Critics of this theory argue that it doesn't explain why the group wouldn't have simply returned to their car or the main road rather than venturing into a hazardous area. 5. The survival plan, attempting to find help and shelter. In this theory, the men may have believed they could find shelter or assistance by heading further into the mountains, possibly under the impression that the forest held cabins or help centers nearby. Survival instincts could explain why they ventured up the mountain rather than down. Snow tracks from other vehicles could have suggested that others had traveled the area recently, leading them to believe they could find refuge. Ted Wyer's body in the cabin and evidence that food had been eaten suggest someone tried to survive after reaching shelter. Counterpoints. Despite their disabilities, the group was generally cautious and aware of risks, making it unlikely they'd go into unknown terrain without a solid reason. Gary and Jack were resourceful and likely aware of basic survival tactics, so why wouldn't they light a fire or activate the propane tank for warmth? Some suspect that if they felt danger was nearby, the men would have preferred to stay hidden rather than seek help openly. 6. Stranger involvement, picking up a hitchhiker, or encountering another car. This theory suggests the group may have picked up a hitchhiker or interacted with someone else on the road, leading to an unexpected diversion. If they encountered someone who led them up the mountain road, it could explain why they ended up in a remote, unfamiliar location. The group's detour off the main road and their unusual route might support the idea of an external influence. A hitchhiker could have manipulated the group's sense of direction, leading them into the mountains and ultimately abandoning them. Family members of the men suggested that none of them would have chosen to take that path willingly, which implies outside influence. Counterpoints. There's no evidence of another person or vehicle associated with their disappearance, and if they had picked someone up, that individual likely would have left more clues or been spotted. It's also unclear why they would leave the car so far up the mountain with no signs of a struggle or additional footprints. 7. The missing person, Gary Mathias's possible survival. The final theory suggests that Gary Mathias may have survived the initial ordeal and attempted to escape alone, never returning to his group. Gary had previously survived difficult circumstances, walking long distances alone, and some speculate he might still be alive under a new identity. Gary was resourceful, once trekking over 500 miles to reunite with family. If he had left the cabin in search of help, it's possible he chose to disappear rather than face the horror of losing his friends. This theory explains why his body was never found, leaving open the possibility of survival or intentional vanishing. Counterpoints. Gary was extremely close to his family and depended on regular medication for his schizophrenia, which makes prolonged survival unlikely. His family has consistently said they believe he perished alongside his friends, and local authorities consider him a victim of the forest's dangerous conditions. Critics argue this theory is highly speculative, with limited evidence to support that he survived or intentionally disappeared. 7 theories, 7 possible answers to an unsolved mystery that has haunted people for decades. What do you believe happened to the Yuba County Five? Was it a tragic accident, a sinister scheme, or something even more mysterious? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. For more stories that will keep you up at night, hit subscribe and join us at BloodSpot. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.